Welcome to History Before Bed, where we bring you calming historical stories perfect for bedtime. I started this channel because I struggled with insomnia, and while audiobooks helped, they were often too exciting to help me sleep. So, I created these stories to be engaging enough to hold your attention, but soothing enough to lull you to sleep. If you enjoy our bedtime history tales, please like and subscribe before you drift off so you never miss an episode. Now, get comfortable, relax, and let the gentle rhythms of history guide you to sleep.
In the echoes of history, the lives of ordinary people often brushed against the extraordinary. While some characters in this story are born from imagination, others, like Achilles, Alexander the Great, Leonidas, and Plato, are drawn directly from the pages of the past. Together, they create a narrative that blends the real with the fictional, offering a glimpse into what could have happened when history's great figures and everyday lives crossed paths. Chapter 1: The Heart of the Polis. The city of Athens, basking in the soft light of dawn, came alive with the first stirrings of its citizens. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying with it the mingled scents of the sea, nearby olive groves, and the smoke from hearth fires being rekindled. Above the city, the Acropolis stood tall, a monumental fortress of stone and marble that dominated the skyline. This sacred rock was the spiritual and cultural heart of Athens. Home to its most revered temples, including the Parthenon, which gleamed golden as the rising sun illuminated its pristine columns. As the day began, the streets of Athens filled with activity. Narrow and winding, these streets wove through the city like the threads of a tapestry, connecting all parts of the polis, from the grand temples atop the Acropolis to the bustling agora below, where the pulse of civic life beat strongest. The agora was the beating heart of Athens, a large open space surrounded by colonnades, stoas, and public buildings. Here, the citizens of Athens gathered to conduct their daily business, exchange news, and engage in debate. Merchants set up stalls under the shade of the stoas, their tables laden with goods from across the Greek world and beyond: fine pottery, bronze works, olive oil, and exotic spices. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the briny scent of fish from the nearby stalls. Cleon, a middle-aged Athenian merchant, made his way through the agora, expertly weaving through the crowd. His tunic, though simple, was of good quality, dyed in a deep, rich blue, a mark of his success in trade. Like many others, Cleon started his day early, knowing that the best deals were often struck before the sun reached its zenith. He greeted fellow merchants with a nod or a few exchanged words, his eyes always scanning the market for potential buyers or partners. The agora was more than just a marketplace. It was the center of Athenian democracy. Here, citizens gathered to discuss the affairs of the state, to argue over policies, and to listen to the speeches of orators. Above the agora, on a platform known as the bema, men like Demosthenes, a renowned orator, would address the assembly, their voices carrying over the crowd as they sought to persuade their fellow citizens on matters of war, peace, and law. The air buzzed with conversation, the exchange of ideas as important as the exchange of goods. From the agora, the city extended outward in a series of districts, each with its own character and purpose. The wealthier citizens lived in spacious homes near the agora, their houses built of stone and adorned with frescoes and mosaics. Further from the center, the homes became more modest, with simple mud brick walls and thatched roofs. These residential areas, though less grand, were no less vital to the life of the city, housing the artisans, craftsmen, and laborers whose work supported the polis. The streets of Athens were narrow and often unpaved, winding through the city in a seemingly haphazard fashion. Yet, there was an order to the chaos, a natural flow that guided citizens from one part of the city to another, from the sacred spaces of the Acropolis to the bustling agora, and from the residential quarters to the public baths and gymnasia where men gathered to exercise and socialize. Overlooking the entire city, the Acropolis was the most sacred space in Athens. Its most famous structure, the Parthenon, was a marvel of Greek architecture, built to honor Athena, the city's patron goddess. The Parthenon's massive Doric columns, perfectly proportioned, rose from the marble steps, supporting the pediment adorned with intricate sculptures depicting scenes from Athenian mythology. The temple's interior housed a colossal statue of Athena, crafted by the sculptor Phidias, her form covered in gold and ivory, a symbol of the city's power and piety. The architecture of Athens was not just functional, it was a statement of the city's values and aspirations. The three classical orders of Greek architecture, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, were employed in different structures throughout the city, each style reflecting a different aspect of Athenian life. The Doric order, with its sturdy and plain columns, was used in the Parthenon, symbolizing strength and simplicity. The Ionic order, more slender and ornate, adorned the Erechtheion, a temple also on the Acropolis, where its famous caryatids, columns sculpted in the form of women, stood watch over the city. The Corinthian order, the most elaborate of the three, was less common in Athens, but was used in some of the city's most luxurious buildings, its intricate capitals showcasing the Athenians' appreciation for beauty and detail. As the day wore on, the sun climbed higher, and the heat of the afternoon began to settle over the city. The agora remained busy, but the activity slowed as the merchants and shoppers sought respite from the sun. Cleon, having completed his business for the day, retreated to the shade of a stoa, where he joined a group of men engaged in a lively debate about the latest news from the Peloponnesian War. The war with Sparta weighed heavily on the minds of all Athenians, coloring their discussions and influencing their decisions. In Athens, every man was expected to be involved in the affairs of the polis, and the agora was the place where these affairs were most vigorously debated. In the evening, as the heat of the day began to dissipate, the city came alive once more. Families gathered for their evening meals, sharing simple dishes of bread, olives, and wine. In the wealthier homes, the meals were more elaborate, with roasted meats, fresh fruits, and the finest wines. After the meal, many citizens would head to the symposia, private gatherings where men reclined on couches drinking wine and discussing philosophy, politics, and poetry. The symposia were an integral part of Athenian social life, where ideas flowed as freely as the wine. It was here that men like Socrates would engage in deep philosophical discussions, challenging the conventional wisdom of the day and encouraging others to question their beliefs. The conversations at these gatherings often shaped the thoughts and opinions that would later be voiced in the agora, influencing the direction of the city's politics and culture. As night fell, the city of Athens, bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps and the light of the moon, became a place of quiet reflection. The Acropolis, illuminated by the stars, stood as a testament to the city's enduring legacy, a reminder of the values that defined the Athenian polis: democracy, wisdom, and the pursuit of excellence in all things. For Cleon and his fellow citizens, the city was more than just a collection of buildings and streets. It was a living, breathing entity, shaped by the actions and decisions of those who called it home. The structures of the polis, the temples, the agora, the homes, were physical manifestations of the ideals that drove Athenian society. And as each day began and ended, the city pulsed with the energy of its people, their lives intertwined with the fate of the polis that they all held dear. Chapter 2: The Trojan War. The tale of the Trojan War has captivated imaginations for centuries, standing as one of the most enduring and influential legends in Western history. Rooted deeply in Greek mythology, the story of the war between the Greeks and the city of Troy is a narrative of heroism, betrayal, love, and divine intervention. At the heart of this legend is the epic poem, the Iliad, attributed to the blind poet Homer, which recounts the events of the final year of the war. But while the Iliad is the primary source of the war's mythic narrative, scholars and historians have long debated whether the war itself was based on actual historical events or whether it was a purely literary creation. The myth of the Trojan War begins with the infamous judgment of Paris. According to legend, the gods were attending a wedding when Eris, the goddess of discord, tossed a golden apple inscribed with the words, "To the fairest among them." The apple was claimed by three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Unable to decide who deserved the apple, they asked Paris, a prince of Troy, to make the choice. Each goddess offered Paris a tempting bribe. Hera promised power, Athena offered wisdom and military success, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite, and as his reward, he was given Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. This abduction, or perhaps elopement, of Helen by Paris sparked the war between the Greeks and the Trojans. The historical reality of the Trojan War has been a subject of fascination and debate for centuries. In the late 19th century, Heinrich Schliemann, an archaeologist with a passion for Homeric epics, excavated the site of ancient Troy in what is now modern-day Turkey. Schliemann's discoveries at Hisarlik, a mound believed to be the location of Troy, uncovered the remains of a city that had been destroyed by fire, lending some credibility to the idea that there may have been a real conflict that inspired the legend. However, the extent to which this war matches the grandeur and scale of the war described in the Iliad remains uncertain. Historians continue to debate whether the war was a significant historical event or a conflation of smaller conflicts that were later mythologized. The legend of the Trojan War is populated by some of the most famous figures in Greek mythology. Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, is central to the narrative. A demigod, born of the mortal Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, Achilles was invincible except for his heel. His prowess on the battlefield was unmatched, yet his fate was sealed by his pride and his conflict with Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, over the concubine Briseis. Hector, the noble prince of Troy and the greatest of its defenders, stood as Achilles' equal and opposite. While Achilles was driven by personal glory and rage, Hector fought to protect his city and family. The duel between Achilles and Hector, which culminated in Hector's death, is one of the most poignant moments in the Iliad, symbolizing the inevitable tragedy of war. Helen, often described as the face that launched 1,000 ships, is another key figure whose beauty and actions set the war in motion. Her character embodies the themes of love, betrayal, and the consequences of human desire. Paris, whose decision to claim Helen as his prize, represents both the folly of youthful arrogance and the destructive power of the gods meddling in human affairs. The war's major events, as recounted in the Iliad and other sources, are marked by intense battles and moments of divine intervention. The Greek coalition, led by Agamemnon, laid siege to Troy for 10 years. During this time, the gods frequently took sides, with Athena, Hera, and Poseidon supporting the Greeks, while Apollo, Artemis, and Aphrodite sided with the Trojans. The war's climax was marked by several key events: the wrath of Achilles following the death of his friend Patroclus, Achilles' killing of Hector, and the eventual fall of Troy through the cunning use of the Trojan horse, a deceptive gift that allowed Greek soldiers to enter and destroy the city from within. The Trojan War left an indelible mark on Greek culture, influencing literature, art, and the very identity of the Greek people. In literature, the war became the foundation for epic storytelling. The Iliad and its companion epic, the Odyssey, not only provided entertainment, but also conveyed moral and ethical lessons. These epics shaped Greek concepts of heroism, where a hero was defined not just by physical prowess, but by their adherence to honor, duty, and the acceptance of fate. Achilles, despite his flaws, exemplified the Greek ideal of kleos, eternal glory earned through great deeds. In art, scenes from the Trojan War were depicted on pottery, in sculpture, and on temple friezes. The dramatic moments of the war, such as the duel between Achilles and Hector, or the sorrow of Priam, Hector's father, pleading for his son's body, were portrayed with vivid emotion, capturing the human cost of the conflict. These depictions served to remind the Greeks of their shared heritage and the values that bound them together as a people. The war also played a significant role in shaping Greek religious beliefs and practices. The gods' involvement in the Trojan War reinforced the idea that the divine had a direct impact on human affairs, and that the favor or wrath of the gods could determine the outcome of any conflict. This belief was reflected in the rituals and sacrifices that were integral to Greek religious life, as individuals and cities sought to secure divine favor through offerings and prayers. The legacy of the Trojan War extended far beyond the borders of ancient Greece. In later centuries, the story of the war was adopted and adapted by the Romans, who claimed descent from the Trojan hero Aeneas, as recounted in Virgil's Aeneid. The themes of the Trojan War, honor, fate, and the tragic consequences of human choices, continued to resonate throughout Western literature and art, from Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida to modern interpretations in film and literature. In essence, the Trojan War, whether myth or reality, became a cornerstone of Greek cultural identity. It was a story that encapsulated the complexities of human nature, the capriciousness of the gods, and the enduring pursuit of glory and honor. Through its retelling across generations, the war shaped not only the Greeks' understanding of their past, but also their ideals for the future, leaving a legacy that would influence Western civilization for millennia. Chapter 3. Life under Alexander the Great. In the year 356 BCE, in the ancient city of Pella, Macedonia, a child was born who would come to redefine the known world. Alexander, later known as Alexander the Great, was the son of King Philip II of Macedonia and Queen Olympias. From his earliest days, Alexander was groomed for greatness. His father, a formidable military strategist, ensured that Alexander was well-versed in the art of war, while his mother instilled in him a deep sense of destiny, often reminding him of his divine lineage, claiming descent from Achilles and Zeus himself. As a young boy, Alexander exhibited remarkable intelligence and a voracious appetite for knowledge. At the age of 13, he was placed under the tutelage of the philosopher Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the ancient world. Aristotle's teachings shaped Alexander's thinking, instilling in him a love for philosophy, science, and the arts, as well as a deep respect for Greek culture and ideals. Aristotle's lessons on ethics, politics, and the natural world would influence Alexander's decisions throughout his life, guiding him as he sought to merge the Greek and Eastern worlds under his rule. When King Philip II was assassinated in 336 BCE, the mantle of leadership fell upon the young Alexander, who was only 20 years old. Almost immediately, he was faced with the challenge of securing his throne. The Macedonian aristocracy, as well as neighboring Greek city-states, tested his resolve, but Alexander swiftly consolidated his power, displaying a ruthless efficiency that would characterize much of his reign. His first military campaigns were against the rebellious Greek city-states, where he asserted his dominance with decisive victories, such as the destruction of Thebes, which served as a warning to others who might challenge his authority. Having secured Greece, Alexander turned his gaze eastward toward the vast Persian Empire, which had long been a formidable adversary of the Greek states. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor, marking the beginning of a campaign that would take him to the edges of the known world. With a disciplined army and unparalleled tactical genius, Alexander won a series of battles that became legendary: Granicus, Issus, and Gaugamela, each bringing him closer to his goal of toppling the Persian Empire. By 331 BCE, Alexander had achieved what many thought impossible. He had defeated Darius III, the Persian king, and taken control of the Persian Empire, which stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River. His conquests did not stop there. Alexander pushed further into Central Asia and eventually into India, where he fought the fierce Battle of the Hydaspes against King Porus. Despite the victory, his men, weary from years of campaigning and longing for home, refused to march further, forcing Alexander to turn back. Alexander's conquests were not merely about territorial expansion. They were also about the spread of Greek culture, a process known as Hellenization. As he moved from one region to the next, Alexander founded cities, the most famous of which was Alexandria in Egypt. These cities became centers of Greek culture and learning, where Greek architecture, language, and customs blended with local traditions. Alexandria, with its grand library and bustling port, became a beacon of knowledge and a melting pot of cultures, attracting scholars, traders, and artists from across the Mediterranean and beyond. The spread of Greek culture across Alexander's empire led to the creation of a new cosmopolitan world. In cities from Egypt to Persia, Greek became the lingua franca, facilitating trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The fusion of Greek and Eastern traditions gave rise to new art forms, religious practices, and philosophical ideas, many of which would endure long after Alexander's empire had fractured. For the ordinary people living under Alexander's expanding empire, the changes brought by his conquests were profound. In Greece, the constant influx of wealth from Alexander's campaigns fueled economic growth, but it also disrupted traditional ways of life. The old city-state model, which had defined Greek society for centuries, began to give way to a more expansive, interconnected world. Greek soldiers, merchants, and artisans found new opportunities across the empire, moving to newly founded cities where they encountered diverse cultures and ways of life. In the cities of the East, the arrival of Greek settlers brought significant changes. Local populations were introduced to Greek customs, clothing, and governance. At the same time, the Greeks who settled in these regions were exposed to new religious practices, foods, and philosophies. This cultural exchange led to a blending of traditions that was reflected in everything from art and architecture to religion and daily customs. Temples dedicated to both Greek and local gods sprang up across the empire, and festivals celebrated a mix of Greek and Eastern deities. However, not all changes were welcomed. The imposition of Greek rule was often accompanied by harsh military campaigns and the suppression of local uprisings. In many places, the old ruling classes were displaced, leading to social and economic upheaval. The introduction of Greek language and culture was sometimes met with resistance, particularly in regions with strong local identities. Yet, over time, many of these regions adopted Greek ways, often blending them with their own traditions to create unique, hybrid cultures. For those who served in Alexander's army, life was a mix of hardship and opportunity. Soldiers who survived the grueling campaigns were often rewarded with land and wealth, allowing them to settle in the newly conquered territories. These veterans became the backbone of the new Greek cities, bringing with them the ideals of Greek citizenship and military discipline. Yet the constant warfare took its toll, and many who had left their homes as young men returned years later, scarred by battle and changed by their experiences. Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE at the age of 32, having never lost a battle. His death, likely caused by fever, left a vast empire without a clear successor, leading to its rapid fragmentation. His generals, known as the Diadochi, carved up the empire into several Hellenistic kingdoms, each ruled by one of Alexander's former commanders. These kingdoms, Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Persia, and Antigonid Macedonia, among others, became centers of power and culture in their own right, continuing the process of Hellenization that Alexander had begun. Despite the political fragmentation, Alexander's influence endured. His campaigns had irrevocably altered the course of history, spreading Greek culture and ideas across 3 continents. The cities he founded became enduring symbols of the blending of cultures, while the military tactics he employed were studied and emulated by generals for centuries to come. In Greece, Alexander's legacy was complex. On one hand, he was celebrated as a military genius and a symbol of Greek ambition. On the other hand, his conquests marked the end of the independent city-states and the beginning of a new era of empire and monarchy. The ideals of Greek democracy and civic participation were gradually overshadowed by the autocratic rule of the Hellenistic kings. The myth of Alexander, however, only grew after his death. He was immortalized in art, literature, and legend, not just in Greece but across the ancient world. Stories of his exploits were told and retold, often embellished to highlight his divine favor and extraordinary abilities. In later centuries, he became a model for other ambitious leaders, from Julius Caesar to Napoleon Bonaparte, each of whom sought to emulate Alexander's conquests and glory. Alexander's reign was a turning point in history, a moment when the Greek world expanded beyond its traditional boundaries to encompass a vast, diverse empire. His legacy, both as a conqueror and as a unifier of cultures, left an indelible mark on the ancient world, shaping the course of history and the development of Western civilization. Chapter 4: The Warrior's Life. The sun rose slowly over the rugged landscape of Laconia, its first rays piercing the morning mist that clung to the mountains. In the heart of this harsh land, the city of Sparta stirred to life, its people bound by a common purpose, a relentless dedication to the art of war. Among them was Leonidas, king of Sparta, a man whose name would soon be etched into the annals of history for his bravery and sacrifice. Leonidas stood outside the barracks, his gaze fixed on the distant peaks that formed the natural fortress of his homeland. The air was cool, but the day would soon grow hot, as the men of Sparta prepared for what would be their greatest challenge yet: the defense of Greece against the vast Persian Empire. Clad in the simple red cloak of a Spartan warrior, Leonidas was the embodiment of his people's values: discipline, endurance, and an unyielding commitment to the collective good. For as long as he could remember, Leonidas had lived by the Spartan code. From the age of 7, he had been taken from his family and placed in the agoge, the rigorous training program that all Spartan boys underwent. The agog was designed to mold them into the perfect warriors, capable of withstanding any hardship and ready to lay down their lives for Sparta without hesitation. Leonidas had endured it all: the brutal physical training, the harsh discipline, the constant competition with his peers. It was a life that allowed no room for weakness or individual desires. Everything was for the polis, for Sparta. The training had not been easy, but it had shaped Leonidas into the man he was today: a king who led by example, a warrior who feared nothing. As he watched the young men of Sparta drill in the courtyard, their movements sharp and precise, Leonidas felt a deep sense of pride. These were the men who would stand with him at Thermopylae, the narrow pass that would become their final battleground. The Spartan way of life was one of stark contrasts. While other Greek city-states, like Athens, placed great value on art, philosophy, and individual achievement, Sparta prized collective strength and martial prowess above all else. The life of a Spartan was one of relentless discipline, from the communal living arrangements to the austere meals taken in the Syssitia. The communal mess halls where all Spartan men ate together, regardless of rank. Here, there was no luxury, no indulgence, only the sustenance needed to fuel their bodies for the rigors of war. Leonidas was keenly aware of the burden he carried as king. Unlike other monarchs who might rule from a position of comfort or privilege, his role was to lead his people by example, to be the first among equals in battle. In Sparta, kings were warriors first and rulers second, and Leonidas had spent his life preparing for the day when he would be called to defend his homeland. That day had come, and the Persian threat loomed large on the horizon. The men who would fight alongside Leonidas at Thermopylae were not only Spartans, but also allies from other Greek city-states, including Thespians, Thebans, and Athenians. Each brought their own traditions, their own reasons for fighting, but all were united by the common goal of defending Greece from the invading Persian forces. The Athenian hoplites, with whom Leonidas had fought in earlier campaigns, were different from the Spartans in many ways. While they shared a common Greek identity and a love of their city-state, the motivations and experiences of the Athenian soldiers were shaped by a different culture. In Athens, citizenship was tied to participation in the democratic process, and the hoplites, citizen soldiers who provided their own armor and weapons, fought not only to defend their city, but also to protect the political freedoms they enjoyed. Athenian soldiers were often motivated by a sense of personal honor and the desire for glory on the battlefield, as well as the defense of their homes and families. They were skilled and brave, but their training was less rigorous than that of the Spartans, and their lives were not as strictly regimented. In Athens, there was room for individuality, for the pursuit of knowledge, art, and personal ambition, which contrasted sharply with the collective mindset of Sparta. As Leonidas prepared for the upcoming battle, he knew that the differences between the soldiers of Sparta and those of other city-states would play a crucial role in the coming conflict. The Spartans, with their unbreakable discipline and unwavering loyalty to the state, would form the backbone of the defense. Their training had taught them to fight as a single unit, to move as one, and to hold the line no matter the cost. Leonidas had chosen his men carefully, selecting only those who had proven themselves in battle, those who could be trusted to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds. He knew that the Persians would bring vast numbers, far more than the Greeks could muster, but he also knew that the narrow pass at Thermopylae would nullify much of that advantage. Here, the courage and discipline of the Spartans would be tested as never before. The final preparations were made, and the men gathered around Leonidas for his orders. His voice was calm, steady, as he spoke to them of their duty, of the honor that would come from defending their homeland. He reminded them that their names would be remembered, not just in Sparta, but throughout Greece, for generations to come. They were the chosen few, the warriors who would stand against the tide of Persian invaders and show the world what it meant to be a Spartan. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the mountains, Leonidas led his men out of the city. The road to Thermopylae was long and arduous, but there was no hesitation in their steps, no fear in their hearts. They marched as one, their spears and shields gleaming in the fading light, their minds focused on the task ahead. For Leonidas, the journey to Thermopylae was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. He had been born into a world of war, a world where every Spartan was taught to value the state above all else, to fight with courage, and to die with honor. As he marched toward what he knew would be his final battle, Leonidas was at peace, knowing that he was fulfilling the role he had been destined for from birth. The contrast between the life of a Spartan warrior and that of an Athenian hoplite was stark, yet both were driven by a deep sense of duty to their respective city-states. While the Athenians fought to preserve their democracy and way of life, the Spartans fought for survival, for the continued existence of their warrior society. As the warriors approached the narrow pass of Thermopylae, Leonidas looked out over the land he had sworn to protect. He knew that the coming days would test them all to their limits, but he also knew that the Spartans would fight with everything they had, holding the line until the very end. For this was the Spartan way, to live and die by the sword, to sacrifice all for the greater good, and to ensure that the name of Sparta would never be forgotten. Chapter 5. The Life of the Farmer. The sun had not yet risen above the horizon, but the small, humble farmhouse of Lysandra and her family was already stirring with life. The scent of earth and the soft murmur of the morning breeze filled the air as Lysandra, a woman in her early 30s with weathered hands and a strong frame, rose from her bed. The thin light of dawn filtered through the cracks in the wooden shutters, casting long shadows across the dirt floor. Her husband, Theon, still slept soundly beside her, exhausted from the previous day's labors, but Lysandra had always risen first, embracing the solitude of the early morning. Outside, the land stretched in every direction, olive groves, vineyards, and fields of wheat, all tinged with the pale green of new growth. The soil was rich here, nestled in a valley beneath the distant hills, but the life it yielded was hard-won. Each day was a test of endurance, of bending nature to human need, and Lysandra knew well the fickle nature of the gods who governed the harvests. Lysandra quietly dressed in her simple tunic, worn and patched from years of use, and wrapped a faded himation around her shoulders to ward off the morning chill. She slipped outside, her bare feet silent on the cool earth, and made her way to the small altar near the edge of the grove. It was a modest stone structure, dedicated to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, upon whom the family's fortunes rested. Lysandra knelt before the altar, placing a small offering of bread and a few drops of wine before the image of the goddess. "Great Demeter," she whispered, her voice soft with reverence, "bless this day and the work of our hands. May the fields be fruitful and the olives plentiful." With her morning prayer completed, Lysandra turned to her tasks. The olive groves were the lifeblood of their farm, and the trees needed constant care. The previous night's rain had left the ground soft, and Lysandra carefully inspected the roots for any signs of rot or disease. The olives themselves were still small, months away from harvest, but Lysandra's practiced eye could already gauge the strength of this year's crop. Theon joined her shortly, his strong, calloused hands already gripping the tools needed for the day's work. He was a man of few words, his face lined from years of toil, but there was a quiet understanding between him and Lysandra. Together, they moved through the grove, trimming branches, pulling weeds, and ensuring that the trees would bear as much fruit as possible. By midday, the sun was high in the sky, and the heat of the day began to bear down upon them. The countryside was silent, save for the occasional call of a bird or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The life of a farmer was one of constant vigilance and unending labor, punctuated only by the changing of the seasons. There was no luxury here, no time for idle chatter or leisure. The fields demanded attention, and any lapse could spell disaster for the entire year. Despite the harshness of their existence, there was a certain rhythm to the work that Lysandra found comforting. Each day was much like the last, marked by the same rituals, the same tasks, the same unchanging landscape. Yet within this routine, Lysandra found a sense of purpose and belonging. The farm was more than just a means of survival, it was her life's work, and each tree, each vine was a testament to the years she and Theon had spent nurturing the land. The children, 2 boys and a girl, returned from tending the small flock of sheep that grazed on the nearby hills. They were young, but already accustomed to the demands of farm life. Like their parents, they moved with the deliberate, measured pace of those who knew the value of their labor. The boys carried bundles of firewood, while the girl, Alara, clutched a basket of wild herbs and mushrooms she had gathered along the way. The afternoon was spent in the vineyards, where Lysandra and Theon carefully pruned the vines, ensuring that the grapes would grow large and sweet in the months to come. The work was slow and meticulous, requiring a careful balance between cutting back the old growth and encouraging the new. The sun beat down on their backs, but neither complained. The future of their family depended on the success of the harvest. As the day waned and the light began to fade, the family gathered for their evening meal. It was a simple affair: bread, cheese, olives, and a small portion of salted fish, washed down with a cup of watered wine. They ate in silence, the weariness of the day settling upon them like a heavy blanket. Outside, the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, twinkling faintly above the rolling hills. Before retiring for the night, Lysandra led the family in a final prayer to Demeter, their voices low and solemn in the dim light of the flickering oil lamp. The gods were always present in their lives, a constant reminder of the fragility of their existence. Without the favor of Demeter and the other deities who governed the natural world, all their hard work could be undone by a single storm, a drought, or a blight. The life of a farmer was one of endurance, of accepting the hardships that came with the land, and finding solace in the small moments of peace and satisfaction that punctuated the long days. As Lysandra lay down to sleep, she felt the weight of the day's labor in her bones, but also the quiet contentment that came from knowing that she had done her part to sustain her family and honor the gods. In the quiet darkness of the countryside, far from the noise and bustle of the city, Lysandra drifted off to sleep, her dreams filled with visions of the land she loved and the hope of another fruitful harvest. Chapter 6: Education and Philosophy. The sun had barely risen over Athens, casting a soft golden hue across the city's iconic white marble buildings. The streets, still quiet, hinted at the day's upcoming vibrancy. Within the walls of a prestigious gymnasium, Pythias, a young Athenian boy from a well-off family, prepared for another day of lessons. At 12 years old, Pythias was at the threshold of adolescence, poised to absorb the wisdom that would shape his future as a citizen of Athens. The gymnasium was more than just a place for physical exercise. It was a hub of intellectual life, where young minds were nurtured alongside strong bodies. The courtyard, bordered by tall, graceful columns, served as a classroom under the open sky. Here, the boys engaged in discussions, learned from their teachers, and prepared themselves for the responsibilities that would come with adulthood. Pythias's father, a wealthy merchant, had spared no expense in ensuring his son received the best education. Today, as on many days, Pythias would be taught by a sophist, one of the learned teachers who traveled from city to city, imparting knowledge to those who could afford their services. The sophists were skilled in many subjects, but they were particularly renowned for their expertise in rhetoric, the art of persuasion, a skill vital in the democratic city-state of Athens. The day began with the study of Homer, whose epic poems were the cornerstone of Greek education. Pythias recited lines from the Iliad with the other boys, his voice steady as he spoke of Achilles' wrath and the fall of Troy. The sophist, a man of middle age with graying hair and sharp eyes, listened intently, occasionally interrupting to ask questions or to explain the deeper meanings behind the verses. Homer's epics were not just stories, they were moral lessons, providing a framework for understanding courage, honor, and the consequences of human actions. Why does Achilles' anger lead to such tragedy? The sophist asked, his voice resonating through the courtyard. Pythias hesitated, then replied, because he lets his pride and emotions control him, leading to the death of his friend Patroclus. His anger blinds him to the consequences. The sophist nodded approvingly. Exactly. Homer teaches us that unchecked emotions can lead to disaster, a lesson all Athenians must learn, especially those who will one day speak in the assembly. The discussion soon shifted from literature to mathematics. Pythias and his peers were taught the principles of geometry, a subject essential for understanding the natural world and for practical applications such as architecture and navigation. The sophists drew geometric shapes in the sand with a stick, explaining the relationships between angles, lines, and circles. Pythias watched, captivated, as complex ideas took shape in the simple patterns on the ground. Mathematics, the sophist explained, was a universal language, one that revealed the underlying order of the cosmos. Yet it was rhetoric that truly captured Pythias's imagination. In a city where every free male citizen had the right to speak in the assembly, the ability to argue persuasively was as important as any other skill. The sophist taught the boys how to construct arguments, how to appeal to both logic and emotion, and how to sway an audience with carefully chosen words. Pythias practiced delivering speeches, learning to control his voice, to use gestures effectively, and to read the reactions of his listeners. Remember, the sophist said, it is not enough to speak well. You must also think well. The true power of rhetoric lies in its foundation in philosophy, in the search for truth and understanding. The names of great philosophers like Socrates and Plato were often invoked during these lessons. Socrates, with his method of questioning that exposed the ignorance of even the most confident of men, had become a symbol of intellectual rigor. Pythias had heard many stories of Socrates' debates in the Agora, where he would challenge Athenians to think more deeply about justice, virtue, and the nature of knowledge itself. His willingness to question everything, even at the cost of his own life, had left a profound mark on Athens. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, was also a topic of discussion. His ideas about the ideal state, the nature of reality, and the role of the philosopher were beginning to influence the intellectual elite of Athens. Plato's academy, where he taught young men to seek truth and wisdom, was becoming one of the most important centers of learning in the Greek world. For Pythias, the teachings of Socrates and Plato were both fascinating and intimidating, offering glimpses into a world of ideas that he was just beginning to explore. As the lesson continued, Pythias couldn't help but think about the differences between his own education and that of less fortunate boys in Athens. While he was surrounded by books, teachers, and the luxury of time to study, many of his peers from poorer families had little more than basic instruction in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Most would never set foot in a gymnasium or hear the teachings of a sophist. Their lives were consumed by labor, their minds left to wrestle with the immediate demands of survival rather than the abstract concepts of philosophy. The disparity in educational opportunities mirrored the broader inequalities within Athenian society. Wealthy families like Pythias's could afford to cultivate the minds of their sons, preparing them for leadership roles in the polis. In contrast, the children of poorer families, though equally intelligent, often had their potential stifled by a lack of resources and opportunities. As the lesson drew to a close, Pythias gathered his scrolls and prepared to leave. The day's teachings had given him much to think about, not only in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of his place in the world. He was acutely aware of the privileges he enjoyed, and with that awareness came a sense of responsibility. The education he was receiving was not just for his own benefit. It was a preparation for his future role as a citizen of Athens, a role that would require wisdom, judgment, and a deep understanding of the world around him. As he walked home through the streets of Athens, Pythias felt a deep connection to the city, to its history, its values, and its people. He knew that the lessons he learned today would stay with him for a lifetime, shaping the man he would become and the contributions he would make to the life of the polis. The future was uncertain, but Pythias was confident that with the education he was receiving, he would be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The wisdom of the philosophers, the knowledge of the sophists, and the lessons of Homer were all tools he would use to navigate the complexities of life in ancient Athens and to help steer the course of his beloved city. Chapter 7: Bread and Olive Oil, the Mediterranean Diet. As the first light of dawn spread across the Athenian sky, households across the city began to stir. In the modest home of Lysandra, the warm scent of baking bread filled the air. The simple, comforting aroma was a familiar one, signaling the start of another day in Athens. The staple of the ancient Greek diet, bread was central to every meal, its preparation a daily ritual that connected the family to the land and to the rhythms of life that had remained unchanged for generations. Lysandra, like most Athenian women, rose early to prepare the morning meal, or kratisma. This was a simple affair, a piece of barley bread dipped in wine, accompanied by olives and perhaps a bit of fresh cheese if the household was fortunate. The bread, known as maza, was usually made from barley, the most common grain in Greece, mixed with water and baked on a hot stone or in a clay oven. It was dense and hearty, providing sustenance that could carry one through the labor of the day. For many, akratisma was consumed quickly and with little ceremony. The men of the household, eager to begin their work or to head to the agora, would eat standing, perhaps chatting briefly about the tasks ahead. The women and children, who stayed behind, ate more slowly, savoring the brief moments of quiet before the busyness of the day truly began. As the sun climbed higher, the city of Athens buzzed with activity. In the markets, stalls overflowed with the bounty of the Mediterranean. Baskets of figs, amphorae filled with olive oil, and strings of garlic hung alongside piles of fresh fish caught that morning in the Aegean Sea. The diet of the ancient Greeks was dictated by the land and sea that surrounded them, a diet that was as simple as it was wholesome. Lunch was often a light meal, taken in the late morning or early afternoon. It might consist of bread and cheese, perhaps accompanied by a few olives or some fresh fruit. Olive oil, the lifeblood of the Greek diet, was used liberally, not only as a cooking fat, but also as a dressing for bread and vegetables. The olive tree, sacred to Athena, was a symbol of the city itself, and its oil was more than just food. It was a connection to the divine, to the goddess who had given the tree to Athens as a gift. Cheese was another staple, usually made from goat or sheep milk. It was eaten fresh or aged, its salty tang a perfect complement to the plainness of bread and the richness of olive oil. Fish, when available, added variety to the diet. The Greeks were skilled fishermen, and the seas around Athens provided a plentiful supply of fish, which was grilled, salted, or preserved in brine. For those who lived near the coast, fresh fish was a regular part of their diet, while in the inland areas, preserved fish was more common. The evening meal, or diapnon, was the most substantial of the day, often followed by a symposium, a social gathering where men would drink wine, converse, and enjoy entertainment. The diapnon was a time for the family to come together, to share the food that had been prepared throughout the day, and to give thanks to the gods for their blessings. Before the meal, it was customary to offer a portion of the food to the household gods, a small sacrifice made in gratitude and in the hope of continued prosperity. The dipnon itself was typically a simple yet satisfying affair. Bread, olives, and cheese were always present, along with vegetables such as onions, garlic, and lentils. These ingredients were often combined into stews or soups, seasoned with herbs like oregano, thyme, and bay leaves. On special occasions, or for those who could afford it, the meal might include meat, usually lamb or goat, roasted or stewed. Meat was a luxury in ancient Greece, reserved for feast days and special celebrations, and when it was served, it was often as part of a communal feast that brought together the wider community. Wine was central to the diapnon and especially to the symposium that followed. Greek wine, typically diluted with water, was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of civilization, a connection to the gods, particularly Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. The symposium was a deeply ritualized event, where men reclined on couches, drank from shared cups, and engaged in intellectual and philosophical discussions. It was during these gatherings that the ideas that shaped Greek culture and society were debated and refined. The symposium was also an opportunity for social bonding, a way to reinforce the connections between members of the community. The men who attended a symposium were bound together by ties of friendship, family, and politics, and the shared experience of drinking, talking, and listening to music or poetry deepened these bonds. The symposium could be a place of serious discussion, but it was also a place of relaxation and enjoyment, a balance between the intellectual and the pleasurable aspects of life. Festivals and religious celebrations were another important aspect of the Greek culinary tradition. During these events, food was not just sustenance but a means of honoring the gods. Sacrifices were made, and the meat of the sacrificed animals was often shared among the community in a communal feast. These feasts were occasions of great joy and abundance, where the usual simplicity of the Greek diet was set aside in favor of a more elaborate spread. Bread, olive oil, and wine remained central, but they were accompanied by a wider variety of meats, sweets made from honey and nuts, and other delicacies. The connection between food and the divine was a constant theme in Greek life. The act of eating was not just a physical necessity, but a ritual that connected the individual to the broader community and to the gods themselves. Whether in the daily offering of a bit of bread to the household gods or in the grand feasts of a festival, food was a way of expressing gratitude, of acknowledging the gifts of the earth and the sea, and of maintaining harmony between the mortal and the divine. As the night fell and the city of Athens quieted, the remains of the day's meals were cleared away, and the household settled into the rhythms of the evening. The olive oil lamps flickered softly, casting a warm glow over the simple wooden tables and clay vessels. The day had been sustained by the earth's bounty, bread from the fields, oil from the groves, and wine from the vineyards, and tomorrow would bring the same. In ancient Greece, food was more than just nourishment. It was a way of life, a reflection of the land and the sea, of tradition and belief. The Mediterranean diet, with its emphasis on simple, fresh ingredients, not only sustained the body but also nurtured the soul, connecting the people of Greece to their environment, their gods, and each other. Chapter 8: Leisure and the Pursuit of Excellence. Sports, Arts, and Festivals. As the first light of dawn touched the peaks of Mount Parnitha, the city of Athens awoke, its citizens ready to engage in the daily activities that shaped their lives. But in this vibrant city-state, work was only one aspect of life. Equally important were the pursuits of leisure, where the body and mind were honed to achieve arete, the Greek ideal of excellence. In Athens, leisure was not just a break from work, but a vital part of the quest for personal and civic honor. At the heart of Athenian leisure was the gymnasium, a place where young men gathered to train their bodies and minds. The gymnasium was more than just a space for physical exercise. It was a center for intellectual discussion, a place where future leaders were molded. Here, Pythias, a young Athenian boy from a well-off family, spent his mornings in the pursuit of both physical and intellectual excellence. The gymnasium was a sprawling complex, with open spaces for running and wrestling, shaded areas for discus and javelin throwing, and quiet corners where students could sit with their teachers and learn the art of rhetoric or study the works of Homer. Physical prowess was highly valued in ancient Greece, and the gymnasium served as a training ground for the athletic competitions that were central to Greek culture. The most prestigious of these competitions were the Olympic Games, held every 4 years in Olympia. Athletes from all over the Greek world traveled to compete in these games, which honored Zeus, the king of the gods. The Olympics were a time of great celebration, where city-states set aside their differences and came together to witness feats of strength, speed, and skill. For the athletes, the preparation for the Olympics was intense. Months of rigorous training in the gymnasium honed their bodies, while strict diets and mental discipline prepared them for the challenge ahead. Events like the stadion, a short foot race, the pentathlon, a combination of running, jumping, discus throw, javelin throw, and wrestling, and the pancration, a brutal mix of boxing and wrestling, tested the limits of human endurance. Victors were celebrated not just for their physical abilities, but for embodying the ideal of arete, bringing honor to themselves and their city. But physical contests were only one aspect of Greek leisure. The arts, music, theater, and poetry were equally important in the cultural life of Athens. The city was famous for its dramatic festivals, particularly the Dionysia, which celebrated Dionysus, the god of wine and theater. The Dionysia was an occasion for the entire city to gather in the theater of Dionysus, carved into the slopes of the Acropolis, to watch the latest tragedies and comedies performed by the finest actors of the time. Theater in Athens was a communal experience, deeply connected to the city's religious and civic life. The great playwrights, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, used their plays to explore complex themes of fate, justice, and the human condition. Their works were not merely entertainment, but also a form of education, challenging the audience to reflect on their own lives and the moral dilemmas faced by the characters on stage. The comedies of Aristophanes, on the other hand, provided a more light-hearted, yet equally insightful, commentary on Athenian society, using humor and satire to critique the city's politics, culture, and even its most revered figures. Music and poetry were also integral to Greek life, with performances often taking place at public festivals or private gatherings known as symposia. The lyre and the aulos, a reed instrument, were commonly played, and poets recited epic tales or composed new verses to celebrate the gods, love, and the heroic deeds of the past. The Homeric epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, were recited and revered, their stories serving as both a source of inspiration and a guide to the virtues that Greeks sought to emulate. Public festivals in Athens, such as the Panathenaea, were grand celebrations that combined religious rituals with athletic competitions, music, and feasting. The Panathenaea, held in honor of Athena, the city's patron goddess, was the most important festival in Athens. It featured a grand procession that wound its way through the city, culminating in the offering of a new peplos, a woven robe, to the statue of Athena on the Acropolis. Prosody percent. The festival also included musical contests, recitations of Homeric poetry, and athletic events, all designed to honor the goddess and showcase the talents of the Athenian people. These festivals were not only religious occasions, but also opportunities for civic pride and unity. They reinforced the bond between the citizens of Athens and their city, reminding them of their shared heritage and the values that underpinned their society. The Panathenaea, for example, was open to all Athenians, rich and poor alike, and the events were a testament to the city's commitment to excellence in both body and mind. Even in times of war, the Greeks found ways to honor their gods and celebrate their culture through festivals. The Eleusinian Mysteries, held in honor of Demeter and Persephone, were secret religious rites that offered initiates the promise of a blessed afterlife. These mysteries, celebrated annually at Eleusis near Athens, were deeply spiritual events that attracted participants from all over the Greek world. The rituals, shrouded in secrecy, involved processions, sacrifices, and the reenactment of the myth of Demeter's search for her daughter Persephone, who had been abducted by Hades. Leisure in ancient Greece was thus a complex and multifaceted concept, encompassing physical, intellectual, and spiritual pursuits. It was in these moments of leisure, whether in the gymnasium, the theater, or the festival, that the Greeks expressed their deepest values and aspirations. The pursuit of arete, the quest for excellence, was at the heart of Greek life, driving them to achieve greatness in all things, from athletic competition to artistic creation. As the sun set over Athens, casting long shadows across the city's temples and public spaces, the citizens returned to their homes, their bodies and minds invigorated by the day's activities. The gymnasia were empty, the theaters silent, but the spirit of the day lingered, a reminder of the central role that leisure played in the life of the polis. For the Athenians, leisure was not an escape from life's duties, but a vital part of fulfilling them, a means of achieving the excellence that defined their culture and ensured the enduring legacy of their civilization.
Thank you for joining me tonight on History Before Bed. I hope you found our journey through the past both intriguing and restful. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what story you'd like to hear next. Sweet dreams, and I'll see you in the next episode. Good night.